Some observers believe Volodymyr Zelensky is trying to probe the limits of Russia's hidden missile arsenal, raising questions about whether Moscow possesses capabilities beyond systems such as Oreshnik and the reported Kedar platform. Critics of Kiev's strategy argue that calls for deeper strikes inside Russian territory could provoke a response that reveals previously unseen ballistic missile capabilities, potentially exposing more of Vladimir Putin's military toolkit. By maintaining pressure on Russia despite repeated warnings from Moscow, Zelensky risks triggering a reaction that could showcase some of Russia's most advanced and potentially deadliest weapon systems for the first time in the conflict. Ukraine now claims that Russia has missed what may have been its most favorable opportunity to negotiate an end to the war, arguing that the Kremlin rejected a diplomatic opening that may not return. European leaders are increasingly concerned that the conflict is turning into a prolonged and open-ended war on the continent's doorstep, with no clear path toward a lasting settlement in sight. As tensions in the Middle East continue to demand Washington's attention, Donald Trump signaled that Ukraine and Russia should work out their differences directly, suggesting the two sides may need to take greater responsibility for negotiations themselves. Ukraine warned that Vladimir Putin had missed what it described as a crucial opportunity to negotiate a favorable end to the conflict, arguing that Russia had chosen to prolong the war instead of pursuing a diplomatic settlement. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrii Sybiha declared that Russian President Vladimir Putin had missed his window to bring the war to an end, accusing the Kremlin of rejecting a chance to secure more favorable negotiating terms. Sybiha further argued that the situation would only get worse for Russia over time, claiming that mounting military, economic, and diplomatic pressures would continue to increase if Moscow refused to change course. At the same time, President Volodymyr Zelensky suggested that Ukraine was very close to deploying a domestically produced ballistic missile capable of striking targets inside Russia, in remarks widely seen as a challenge directed at the Kremlin. Notably, Putin dismissed Zelensky's public proposal for face-to-face peace talks as inappropriate, rejecting the Ukrainian leader's open letter appeal for direct negotiations between the two presidents. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Andrii Sybiha, said in a social media post, and I quote, "By refusing President Zelensky's offer for direct peace talks, Putin lost his chance to get out of his failed war. Things will only get worse for Russia. Battlefield losses will continue to grow. Failures will get more humiliating. The economy will plunge deeper into recession. More jobs will be lost, taxes will be growing, and inflation will hit those most vulnerable. There are already no safe places in Russia that can be exempt from Ukraine's long-range sanctions. But their intensity will continue to grow. The international pressure will not ease. It will only get stronger, including the use of frozen assets, travel bans, and inevitable accountability for crimes. All of this because the fanatic in the Kremlin wants to keep in power at any cost and is ready to sacrifice his country's future and kill millions of people for his insane delusions. All of this because he doesn't want to admit a simple truth. He will never achieve his goals on the battlefield, and he better abandon his delusional hopes of Ukraine collapsing soon, support from its partners waning, or pressure on Russia easing. Russia will still have to accept a diplomatic solution, but the terms will be far worse. Putin's refusal of peace should lead to a significant increase in international pressure on Russia and support for Ukraine. The statement came ahead of high-level discussions involving British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the leaders of France and Germany, as European powers intensified efforts to shape the next phase of diplomacy over the war. The London talks were largely focused on securing a Russia-Ukraine ceasefire, with key European governments seeking a more prominent role in any future peace process or negotiations. European leaders also called for direct dialogue between Ukraine and Russia, arguing that any meaningful diplomatic breakthrough would likely require active participation from both the United States and Europe. Interestingly, Russian officials dismissed Zelensky's open letter as evidence that Ukraine was running out of options, portraying the proposal for direct talks as a sign of Kiev's growing desperation rather than diplomatic strength.
The citizens of Azerbaijan were killed, and then Ukrainian drones fly to Europe. Zelensky is an illegitimate president, and the fact that he writes letters means that he probably has no other option. If he decided to write a letter to our president, then at the beginning of the letter he had to write, "I cancel my decree prohibiting negotiations with you," and then on the text. But he said so much. Did you see that he allowed to hold a parade in Moscow on the Red Square? People are already talking there, but I still stand for it. We have to hold a dialogue. I'm not talking about Zelensky specifically. We have to hold a dialogue to reach a peace agreement. Not an imitation of a dialogue, as Europe offers us. And the main thing they discuss is who will hold the negotiations. They should put a plan in their proposal.
US President Donald Trump said he doesn't mind if Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky meet face-to-face, signaling support for direct talks between the Russian and Ukrainian leaders as efforts to end the war continue.
Describe Ukraine. Now that Zelensky has proposed a face-to-face meeting with Zelensky, do you still want them to go first before the U.S. gets involved in talks?
Well, I don't mind. I mean, it's let them deal. I'm the one that got them to this position. And I think that's going to get worked out. I think we're getting close to where Russia, Ukraine should have. It's a war that should have never happened, would have never happened if I was president. But I think that's going to get worked out.
Ukrainian analyses have revealed the true destructive potential of Russia's Oreshnik missile, detailing how its design and payload could translate into unprecedented damage if deployed in combat. Tests and fragment studies suggest Oreshnik's conventional submunitions weigh about 50 kilograms each, a mass that helps explain both their kinetic energy on impact and the pattern of damage they leave behind. Those submunitions appear to be solid cast metal ingots rather than sophisticated guided kinetic penetrators, indicating a simpler, and in some ways more brutal, approach to maximizing impact through mass and velocity. Fragments recovered from strikes show that the warheads are made of cast iron rather than higher performance steel or tungsten alloys, a factor that affects how they deform and what kind of damage they ultimately inflict. Experts caution that, despite extremely high re-entry velocities, the overall damage from these cast metal submunitions is relatively modest compared with guided penetrators or modern-shaped charges. In one documented case, a single submunition pierced a roof and continued through 5 floors before finally stopping on the building's first floor, illustrating both impressive penetration and limited controlled destruction. Impact holes left by these devices measured roughly half a meter by half a meter in several buildings, evidence of concentrated kinetic strikes rather than wide-area blast effects. Another recovered submunition penetrated a roof and the first floor and continued down to basement level, underscoring how some of these masses can travel deep into structures before losing momentum. One impact created a crater approximately 2 meters wide and 60 centimeters deep, showing that while some strikes are locally destructive, they do not always produce the large-scale devastation associated with high-yield explosives. How widely the submunitions disperse depends heavily on the altitude at which the missile warheads release them, with release height shaping the spread pattern and ultimately the scale of area damage. Analysts estimate that a nuclear deployment of these submunitions would likely require release altitudes on the order of around 5 kilometers to achieve the intended coverage and sequencing. Raising the deployment altitude substantially increases the coverage area and therefore the overall destructive effectiveness, meaning higher release points can transform many small impacts into a much larger combined effect. Experts warn that a nuclear-equipped Kedar would pose an extreme strategic threat, transforming what might look like a conventional system into a weapon capable of reshaping deterrence and escalation dynamics across entire regions. Analysts say the submunition design could reportedly accommodate nuclear warheads of up to about 10 kilotons each, a yield that, when multiplied across many submunitions, would drastically amplify both blast and radiation effects. Open-source assessments indicate the missile carries 36 submunitions, which are reportedly distributed among 6 separate warheads to create multiple independent destructive elements on a single flight. Some experts claim that 36 nuclear submunitions delivered in a single salvo could devastate a major city completely, producing overlapping blast, thermal, and radiation zones that would overwhelm civil defenses. Ukrainian sources assert that the missile's real designation is Kedar rather than Oreshnik, suggesting a different developmental lineage and possibly different operational intentions than Russian public statements imply. Reporting suggests Kedar is reportedly based on the Russian RS-26 Rubez missile system, meaning designers may have repurposed an existing road-mobile strategic missile architecture for this new submunition role. Analysts note the missile lacks MIRV capability for independently targeting separate warheads with precise guidance, which limits its ability to strike many distinct targets with surgical accuracy. Instead, those analysts explain, the warheads appear to function as unguided submunition cassettes rather than as precision strike systems, relying on altitude, timing, and dispersion rather than individual guidance to cover an area. Technical descriptions say 6 warheads each contain 6 submunitions, totaling 36 payload elements that would be released in sequence to create a dense pattern of impacts over the target area. Estimates put the launch weight between roughly 1,250 and 3,000 kilograms overall, a range that reflects uncertainty about materials, fuel loads, and the exact payload configuration used in different tests. Current open-source range estimates reach approximately 4,100 kilometers with the missile's present payload configuration, a distance that would give it intercontinental reach from many Russian launch points. Analysts argue the platform represents a deep modernization of older Soviet or Russian missile designs, combining legacy delivery systems with novel payload concepts to achieve new operational effects. Investigators report they found no modern Western or Chinese electronic components on board, implying the designers relied primarily on domestically produced or older generation parts. Circuit boards and chips recovered from fragments were manufactured mainly between 2014 and 2016, a finding that suggests production used components from that period rather than the very latest microelectronics. Those findings contrast sharply with some Russian drones, which have been shown to use newer foreign-made electronics, highlighting divergent supply chains and design choices across Russian weapon programs.